Good morning, folks. This is the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. This is our Wednesday, March 22nd meeting. We will start with the roll call.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Ackerman.
Here.
Commissioner Cross. Commissioner McGowan.
Here.
Commissioner Messner.
Here.
Commissioner Oath. Commissioner Ray.
Here.
Commissioner Robbins.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have 5 out of 7 commissioners present.
Very good. That is a quorum. Welcome, everybody. It's not on our calendar, but normally we note that we have public comment, but no one signed up for public comment. I did note that Janice Brown provided a written public comment, so we have that in our record. With that, we move to the next agenda item, which is commissioner comments. Does any commissioner have comments? Seeing no comments, the next matter on our agenda is consent agenda. Does any commissioner have questions with regard to consent? Seeing no questions, do we have a motion to approve consent?
So
Motion. Second.
Motion and a second to approve consent. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Moving through our agenda, we now move to docket number 220600163. This involves an oil and gas development plan application from GMT Exploration Company. Why don't we go ahead and elevate the folks that are involved with this application? I believe that would be Ms. Wazlinki, good to see you. And then are we going to hear from the Elbert County Director of Community and Economic Development? And perhaps he would be first.
That's correct, Chair. Mark Dettenreader. I don't see him in the panel yet, so if we can just give a few moments to make sure he's in, he is planning to speak. I see him now.
I see we're getting him. And for folks listening in, when we take up an oil and gas development plan, if the relevant local government, that is the government with jurisdiction, desires to provide comment or perspective on the oil and gas development plan application, we generally take them first. So, Mr. Dettenreiter, I believe we can see you and you are with us, and so you are recognized for comment.
Great, thank you. Good morning. I'm Mark Dettenreader, Director of Community and Economic Development for Elbert County Government. Here in Elbert County, we are aware of this project, and GMT has consulted with the county on the specific location. GMT, in fact, has been in communication with the county about the Cinnamon location since about February of 2022. This particular location is not in conflict with any known county plans or pending developments. Elbert County, as you might imagine, is the relevant local government for this location, but we don't regulate the siting of oil and gas. We have waived that authority. We do oil and gas permits though, and per our local requirements, we have a drilling permit for each well, and then we have a grading permit for the proposed location and the access road. Of course, this comes after the COGCC approves the Cinnamon OGDP. We also have a master road use agreement, and this is in place between the county and GMT, and this further addresses like traffic and local road infrastructure needs. I think it's important to note the haul route that's being used for this project. That's also authorized by that master road use agreement. All in all, since I've been working for the county for the past 2 years, we've had really close communication with GMT and engagement with the operator, and with the wells that they have already drilled and completed in the county. I would certainly say that the experience has been positive. I'm also very confident that GMT will secure the required county permits after the COGCC permits are approved. The approval of this will facilitates significant economic investment in Elbert County. All in all, I'd like to say from Elbert County, we are in support of this location and the development plan that GMT is proposing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Commissioners, are there questions for Mr. Denton Reader? Commissioner McGowan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Denton Reader, for providing testimony today. I'm glad that you're here. Could you describe a little bit the community to the north of this site and any efforts by Elbert County to let the neighbors know that this is going to be happening?
Yeah, the GMT and the county, we certainly encourage and require community outreach efforts and community meetings, and those types of things have taken place previously with our experience with GMT. And these are publicly noticed, and they have been effective.
Thank you. Are these public meetings and outreach community outreach plans not required, but maybe encouraged by the county after the commission makes a decision about the OGDP, or has this already occurred?
Commissioner, I don't know the specifics on that in terms of the timeline and the sequencing, so I would have to defer to GMT to elaborate on that when the appropriate time comes.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions? All right, seeing no further questions, Mr. Denton Reader, we appreciate your being here and providing perspective from Elbert County. You can stick around if you like. We're going to hear from the applicant next.
Thank you.
Good morning, commissioners. If you could just give us a moment, we do have a PowerPoint.
Everyone see that?
Not yet.
We can't.
I got a couple of screens open here.
Great,
All right,
we do see this.
Yep, we do see the PowerPoint presentation now.
Wonderful, thank you. Then we will go ahead and get started. Good morning, commissioners. My name is Kelsey Wazelinski with Jost Energy Law, and with Jamie Jost, we represent GMT Exploration in the Cinnamon 664-19-7 OGDP before you today in docket 2206-00163. We would like to thank Mr. Denton Reader for his comments today and for Elbert County's participation and support through the OGDP process, and also COGCC staff and the director for their efforts on this OGDP. Next slide. I'll take just a few minutes to summarize the Cinnamon OGDP and requested relief before I turn it over to GMT. This OGDP requests that the commission establish an approximate 1,455 acre drilling and spacing unit to develop 10 new horizontal wells in the Niobrara Formation. The Cinnamon OGDP also requests that the commission approve one new Form 2A for the new Cinnamon 664-19-7 pad for the development of 10 new horizontal wells. As indicated by Mr. Denton Reader, the Cinnamon OGDP is located within Elbert County, and Elbert County waived its siting authority for oil and gas locations. GMT has been in close communication and consultation with Elbert County throughout the OGDP process and will obtain an oil and gas operations permit and a local grading permit for the proposed location and access road from Elbert County after the COGCC approves the Cinnamon OGDP. GMT also maintains a master road use agreement with Elbert County to address traffic and road infrastructure needs at the county level. This OGDP does not trigger any Rule 304 ALA criteria, and specifically the proposed location is over 2,000 feet from residential building units and high occupancy building units, over 2,000 feet from all schools and childcare centers, and not within any high priority habitat. As part of the Cinnamon OGDP, GMT is committed to several BMPs to avoid, minimize, and mitigate potential adverse impacts, which GMT will describe today. And finally, GMT has complied with all notice requirements for the Cinnamon OGDP. No formal petitions were filed, and 4 public comments in support of the OGDP were submitted. And with that, I'll turn it over to Hans Schuster, the DJ Basin Land Manager for GMT, to continue the presentation.
Next slide. Good morning, commissioners. My name is Hans Schuster. I'm the DJ Basin Land Manager for GMT Exploration Company. I, along with Maxwell Blair, am appreciative of the opportunity to present this Cinnamon OGDP to you today. I will present a variety of topics to you regarding the Cinnamon OGDP and seek your approval of this application today. GMT sincerely thanks Elbert County for attending and providing comments in support of this development plan. GMT appreciates the partnership with Elbert County and looks forward to continuing to work with their team as our development progresses. Next slide. GMT Exploration Company LLC is a privately held independent upstream E&P company engaged in the generation, operation, and development of oil and natural gas properties in the DJ Basin. It was formed more than 20 years ago and has owned and operated properties in Texas, New Mexico, Wyoming, Alaska, Colorado, and Canada, both operated and non-operated. Along with myself and Mrs. Wazelenki, Mr. Maxwell Blair will be presenting the Cinnamon OGDP application. And we also have a few subject matter experts on hand from GMT to address any potential questions from the commission. Next slide. Cinnamon oil and gas location is located in the southern end of the 1,455 acre drilling and spacing unit and will be used to develop 10 horizontal wells for the development of the Niobrara Formation. The Cinnamon location is not within the ozone non-attainment area and did not meet any Rule 304(b)(2) criteria. There are no residential building units or schools within 2,000 feet of the oil and gas location, with the closest residential building unit being 2,146 feet from the location. The location is not within high priority habitat. GMT has a surface use agreement with the surface owner, has consulted with Elbert County about obtaining a commercial grading permit, commercial access driveway permit, and an oil and gas operations permit for the development of the wells from the proposed Cinnamon location. The cultural features map on this slide illustrates the very rural nature of the area in Elbert County. The surface location is zoned rangeland by Elbert County with the current use as agricultural rangeland. I will now turn the presentation over to Mr. Maxwell Blair. Thank you, commissioners.
Max, we can't hear you. We cannot.
Yeah, Max, you're unmuted, but for some reason, we're still not able to hear you.
Yeah, give us just a
How
few
about
moments.
now?
Oh, there we
Yep.
go. Yes.
All right, I apologize, folks. Could I have the next slide, please? Thank you, Mr. Schuster and Kelsey, for the next slide. Good morning, commissioners. My name is Maxwell Blair. I am the regulatory manager for GMT. I'll now take you through several slides regarding the details of the Cinnamon location permitting and our development plans. GMT is eager to start development on the Cinnamon location and appreciates the work of COGCC staff on the OGDP application and the director's recommendation for approval issued on March 10th of 2023. Sorry, I'm being told I've got an echo. Did that improve it?
I think you're okay.
Okay. So as shown on this slide, GMT engaged in several pre-application discussions with Elbert County prior to filing the OGDP, and the required 7-day completeness notice letter and notice of hearing were mailed by our council. GMT received 4 comments in support of the OGDP application and no petitions were filed. And I do recognize there were some questions around our engagement with the community. I will address those a little bit further on in the presentation. Next slide, please. With respect to Elbert County as the relevant local government, on November 3rd, 2022, Elbert County commissioners submitted a public comment letter in support of the Cinnamon OGDP to the commission. GMT has had several conversations with Elbert County Public Works, with their public health and environment, their fire district, and their community development department about our development plans in the county in general and for this Cinnamon location specifically. Elbert County appreciates the Cinnamon location avoids, minimizes, and mitigates impacts on current land by GMT citing the location more than
Mr. Blair, we can't hear you now.
I apologize.
Yep, you're no longer. We can't hear you again.
How about now?
Now is good.
All right. And no echo?
No echo.
All right. Lost my place, but We've been in touch with Elbert County. The siting is more than 2,000 feet from any existing home, as well as GMT's diligent actions to mitigate noise and dust. The county, we've discussed these issues with the county. GMT and Elbert County Public Works have also entered into agreements regarding trucking haul routes and road maintenance, which I will cover in more detail later in the presentation. GMT will obtain a local oil and gas operations permit for each well and a local grading permit for the proposed location and access road from Elbert County after the COGCC approves this OGDP. And GMT will maintain the master road use agreement with Elbert County to further address traffic and road infrastructure needs at the county level. Next slide, please. We're going to address some public comment. In addition to the comments submitted by Elbert County, 3 nearby surface owners and homeowners submitted comments in support of the OGDP. These public comments highlight the good engagement between GMT and the surface and homeowners in the area. As you can see from the public comments submitted in support of the OGDP, the nearby surface owners.
Hate to break it to you, Mr. Blair, but you're no longer, we can't hear you.
Did that fix the problem?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, so the public comments we received were all in support of this application, and these folks live to the north of the site, the neighborhood to the north. And let's see, I apologize, I keep losing my place there. We request approval for this OGDP, as you can imagine. Next slide, please. We'll discuss a bit about the phases of operation and the timing for this project. If we receive approval of this OGDP application, GMT will submit corresponding Form 2s for the Cinnamon location, and we plan to commence construction in May of 2023. This construction will include both the pad location and production facility. Once we receive the approved Form 2s from the Commission for this OGDP, we intend to start drilling operations in July of 23, with completions in August of 23 and first production in October of 23. As you can see, we have a very aggressive timeline to get this project started and the initial well online in 2023. Elbert County is aware of our development schedule, and we will continue to work with the county to ensure we have the necessary county permits in place for the Cinnamon location. Next slide, please. Takeaway and trucking. Once saleable gas is encountered, that gas will be directed to the sales gas pipeline. This pipeline has already been constructed and runs adjacent to the Cinnamon location. It's shown in yellow on this map. And due to the exploratory nature of this development, the produced oil and water will be stored on site in tanks and trucked off location daily. The map here shows haul routes that GMT will utilize for this location, which was sent to all interested parties to the OGDP application in our certified completeness mailings. And this map is essentially the exhibit to our master road use agreement with Elbert County, shows all the routes that we've been approved to use within the county. We did receive a question from the commission prior to the hearing here. I'll take a moment to address that a little bit further. The question was regarding our oil takeaway plans. And while GMT is exploring oil takeaway options, including a pipeline, it's not something we can commit to a date certain at this point in time. But it's always been part of our planning for this area. We're currently evaluating several options for future oil takeaway to reduce the necessary oil hauling from these locations, from the Cinnamon location. Without consistent, predictable well results, that's a difficult and nearly impossible to commit to that at this time. I guess it's important to note for the commission that GMT drilled the first horizontal well in Elbert County in the Niobrara Formation just in October of 2021, fairly recent history. And we're the sole operator engaged in horizontal development in the county at this time. We currently have 5 horizontal wells in production. We're at the extreme southern end of the productive Niobrara development area. The wells that we're drilling today are exploratory, and we hope that the results of our 2023-2024 drilling program will generate enough production and have the necessary economic elements to support expanding infrastructure for oil takeaway. Next slide, please, Kelsey. On the next few slides, we're going to highlight a few of our protective best management practices that we will implement for the Cinnamon project. Starting with construction, we'll utilize a combination of wattles and ditches around the perimeter of the site in downsloping areas prior to earth disturbing activities taking place to protect the surrounding property. The location will comply with statewide wildlife protection requirements of Rule 1202.A3, and GMT will not locate any staging, refueling, or chemical storage within 500 feet of the ordinary high water mark of any river, perennial, or intermittent stream, lake, pond, or wetland. The access road will be gravelled, and we'll have a total of 4 corrugated metal culverts installed along the road to protect the drainage. And diversion ditches will be used for stormwater control. And I guess I'll further note that we will secure a grading permit from Elbert County, which does have stormwater elements involved in the grading permit, as well as state CDPHE stormwater permit that's required. Next slide, please. With drilling and completion, GMT will drill up to 10 horizontal wells using a rig powered by diesel generators for this site. GMT has committed to using water-based mud for drilling of surface holes, and then we'll be switching to a type 2 oil-based mud for all of the laterals. Drill cuttings will be stored in closed containers on location, will be trucked to a commercial disposal facility. Continuous monitoring will be used to track fluid volumes and monitor for leaks. A closed loop system will be used. Fluid storage tanks on location will be equipped with visual level indicators that are inspected by operations personnel. Sound walls will be installed on the north side of the proposed location to mitigate noise impacts to the RBUs north of the location through the duration of drilling and completions operations. And permanent lighting will not shine above the horizontal plane passing through the center point of the light source to shine beyond the boundary of the working pad surface. Again, we received a question from the commission after preparing the slide deck here, but the question was related to drilling occupations on the site. And GMT intends to return to this pad for, we intend to drill a single well initially in 2023, but we do intend to return to the pad for 1 additional occupation to drill and complete remaining locations, after which the full interim reclamation operations will be completed. The decision to drill a single initial well in this unit is based on several factors, including completing contractual obligations, scheduling, field delineation, and current infrastructure capacity, to name a few. GMT's long-term model in Elbert County anticipates drilling between 2 and 3 full pads a year over the next 4 to 7 years. The time frame in which GMT plans to return to the Cinnamon pad is dependent on the success of the initial unit well, the success of other unit wells in the field, oil prices, and other factors that are out of our control at this point. GMT anticipates that it will return to the Cinnamon location to drill the remaining wells in this unit within the next 4 years, provided some of those items I mentioned previously are met. In addition, GMT has worked diligently with the surface owner to the south to accommodate a location sited in the area that is greater than 2,000 feet from any RBU in the neighborhood to the north. Of the lots in the neighborhood to the north, which for the most part have not been severed, it's an intact estate. The resident is also the mineral owner. GMT holds leases with the majority of those property owners, and many of them have expressed, informally expressed support for the industry and specifically for this project. during our contact with them, which would be direct outreach through negotiations, during neighborhood meetings, local public events that we've attended. Folks have come up to speak with us informally, phone calls and other interactions. And I'll get into a little more detail later about our engagement there. Next slide, please. For production, some of our best management practices include PVT alarms, automation, and other sensory monitoring to monitor active tank levels at all times. During any transfer operations, visual inspections from inlet and outlet vessels with radio communication will be implemented. Daily visual inspections performed on all equipment, hoses, valving to ensure integrity of fluid containment at all times. We also have an LDAR program that's implemented on all of our production locations. Secondary containment devices will be constructed around the crude oil, condensate, and produced water tanks that will provide for 150% of the largest tank volume. Secondary containment devices will be inspected at the same time we perform stormwater inspections. And when personnel are on location, they'll do daily inspections. I think we had another commissioner question regarding VOCs and other emissions from the site and the numbers around our pre-production estimates and post-production estimates. One item that we noted in reviewing the data in response to the commissioner question was that the pre-production phases represent construction, drilling, and completions. Altogether, those phases only last about 2.5 to 3 months, whereas the post-production phase covers a full year. So there would be naturally some differences in those emission estimates, just simply related to the time span of the period that we're estimating. However, I want to make sure it's clear that for this location, GMT has several pieces of emission reducing equipment planned, including the use of instrument air to operate all of our pneumatic controller devices. We won't be using gas, we'll be using air. We have a VRU plan to capture tank vapors and other residual vapors to capture them rather than release them. And we will have a combustor on site for any hydrocarbons that we cannot put through the sales pipeline. We are also working with the local utility company, and we have plans to bring electric power to the site. Our current application doesn't reflect this because we've been through our communications with Core Electric, the local utility. We've learned there's very limited electrical infrastructure in the area, and the utility power may take a year or more to be installed for this site. Once we have a commitment, a time horizon, we'll be filing a Form 2 sundry with the commission to permit any changes required to the facility to bring that electric power on site to operate equipment there. And then lastly, in our review of our Form 2B, we did identify one data entry error that might have triggered the question from the commission. Our post-production VOC emissions for pneumatic controllers were reported as 55.68 tons per year, whereas the actual number should have been reported as 16 tons per year, a significantly lower number. We've communicated this to staff, and we will be submitting a revised 2B for final processing once this commission hearing has concluded. Next slide, please, Kelsey. I want to talk about our community engagement efforts here in Elbert County. An important aspect of our OGDP is our engagement with nearby surface owners, homeowners, and the Elbert County community at large. As we've discussed, we've engaged the surface owner for the surface location, have an agreement in place to coordinate our development. We've had substantial and continual engagement with Elbert County to discuss and coordinate the Cinnamon and our overall development plans. We've engaged with Elbert County community to share our GMT development plans in the area. We've included a few photographs in the slide here. In the bottom left, you'll see a photo of a rig tour. We've offered numerous small group rig tours to county officials, neighbors, other members of the local community. We've had several community meetings. That second photo at the bottom, that is from a meeting held at the Spring Valley Golf Club, which is about 3 miles from the Cinnamon location. And And then lastly, there's a photo here from the Elbert County Fair where we've been in attendance, had a booth, and had a great opportunity to interact with members of the community on a one-on-one basis. I recognize there were some additional questions about our outreach and specifically around the neighborhood to the north. That neighborhood is called the Mountain View Ranch Subdivision. I'll first share that all residential building units are greater than 2,000 feet from the pad, from the working pad surface. GMT and its affiliate Tenderfoot Pipeline have been active in Elbert County since 2017, and we began outreach, as is often the case in oil and gas developments, through our leasing and negotiations for surface use agreements, access agreements, pipeline agreements. Specifically, the Mountain View Ranch subdivision, almost 90% of the residents in that neighborhood are lessees with GMT. Throughout all of our development, we followed all Elbert County notice requirements for the permitting that's taken place, and that includes direct mailing to residents within the Mountain View Ranch subdivision. GMT has held 3 community meetings since 2021, and members of Mountain View Ranch subdivision have attended some of these meetings, and the response we've received has been overwhelmingly positive on those occasions. GMT also has sent voluntary direct mailings to a broad list of property owners in the area within Elbert County. The list included properties that are near well sites, access roads, pipelines, and our haul routes. We provided that mailing to ensure that residents had contact information for GMT and to ensure they knew that our line was always open should they have any questions or concerns about any changes they might see in traffic patterns or impacts they might experience from our operations. We do plan to continue that effort to continue sending voluntary community outreach mailings to make sure those lines of communication stay open. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Mr. Schuster, and thank you for your time.
Next slide. Thank you, Mr. Blair. I'll now take a few minutes to describe the sworn testimony submitted in support of the OGDP and spacing application. The spacing application submitted with the OGDP requests to establish an approximate 1,455.41 acre drilling and spacing unit for the development and operation of 10 horizontal wells in the Niobrara Formation. GMT submitted detailed land testimony and exhibits illustrating that GMT has a majority leasehold in the proposed drilling and spacing unit for the development and operation of 10 horizontal wells in the Niobrara Formation. In addition, COGCC staff indicated in the director recommendation that staff appreciates the utilization of a single large DSU for these application lands, eliminating the need for multiple individual wellbore spacing units. Next slide. GMT also submitted detailed geologic testimony and exhibits to support the OGDP and spacing applications. The geology exhibits show that the Niobrara Formation is present throughout the application lands, is approximately 325 feet to 375 feet thick, and is both a hydrocarbon source rock and a reservoir. Next slide. And finally, GMT submitted detailed engineering testimony and exhibits to support the OGDP and spacing applications. The engineering testimony confirmed that the drainage area for an average horizontal Niobrara Formation well with a lateral length of 12,000 feet is estimated at 114 acres. The average drainage distance, equidistant from the horizontal wellbore, is estimated to extend 202 feet, and an approximate 1,455.41 acre drilling and spacing unit is therefore not less than the maximum area that can be efficiently, economically, and effectively drained by 10 horizontal wells producing oil, gas, and associated hydrocarbons from the Niobrara Formation. The engineering testimony also showed that the average drainage radius will not extend beyond the requested subsurface setbacks, thereby preventing waste and protecting correlative rights. The engineering testimony further showed that horizontal wells drilled in the Niobrara Formation would be economic. And now, Mrs. Wazelinski will provide a summary of the OGDP. Thank you again for your time today, Commissioners.
Thank you, Mr. Schuster. Next slide, please. To summarize the Cinnamon OGDP and GMT's request for approval, we note the following OGDP highlights. No petitions were filed to the OGDP and 4 public comments were submitted in support. Elbert County was consulted and waived its siting authority. Elbert County supports GMT's development of the Cinnamon OGDP. The Cinnamon OGDP provides substantial protections of public health, safety, welfare, the environment, and wildlife resources by siting outside of sensitive receptors. The best management practices avoid, minimize, and mitigate potential temporary impacts. Per the director recommendation, COGCC staff conclude that the proposed site-specific BMPs will adequately minimize and or mitigate the potential for adverse impacts to public health, safety, and welfare. This includes the use of a closed-loop drilling system and pitless mud system, the use of sound walls on the north side of the location, and the use of lighting shields and downward angles for lighting on the proposed location. And finally, the director recommendation concludes that COGCC staff does not anticipate any significant potential direct adverse impacts to public health, safety, welfare, the environment, and wildlife resources. Next slide. This slide shows the relief requested for the Cinnamon OGDP. We respectfully request approval of the OGDP and associated drilling and spacing unit. And this does conclude our presentation, and we are open for questions.
Thank you to the panel for the presentation. Do appreciate that. If we want to stop the screen share, I'll be able to see everybody a little bit better. Very good. Turning to my fellow commissioners, do folks have questions for the panel? Commissioner McGowan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for your presentation, and thank you for answering some of the questions that I had. And I apologize if sometimes the questions seem late and after your presentation gets submitted. I don't submit my questions till after I've talked to our OGLAs, because sometimes they know the answers to my questions and then I don't have to bother you. So I apologize, but my meeting with them was on Tuesday morning, and so I submitted them as soon as I could. And maybe we can try to figure out a little bit better process. I appreciate the responses to the questions. I'm wondering if I'm going to make a comment for my view of some of our rules, and I understand that these are our rules, and the 2,000 foot seems to be this magical number where, well, I don't have to do other things because it's further than 2,000 feet away. And I guess the way that I view it is there are some best practices that we should always be thinking about, regardless of if it's 2,000 feet or 2,100 and whatever feet away. There's still a community to the north. And I'm appreciative that you've been able to show that you've had outreach to this subdivision. Sometimes I think folks don't really know what to expect when this operation is going to come, and it will impact them, even though it's slightly more than 2,000 feet away. And so I was glad to hear that you've been talking to them, that you've sent out flyers to them individually. I'm wondering if you could commit also to letting them know what your schedule is. Similarly, because you're going to be coming in more than once. I think some folks' expectation when we have drilling, at least what we've seen as commissioners, right, is it's one and done and you're trying to get in quickly and get out. So you are the least disturbing to the folks who live in the area, and you will be coming back again. And it sounds to me like you might not be coming back for 4 years. And folks might think that you're done. You came and you did what you're going to do because they don't have a lot of knowledge about what's happening with oil and gas, right? And so I'm wondering if you could commit to letting them know what your schedule looks like and when you might be coming, when your first drilling is going to happen, and then your second sweep. I'll stop there with my first question.
Commissioner McGowan, first, let me ask, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
All right,
Yes.
wonderful. And I do apologize for the technical problems. I don't know what, had some competing software fighting for my microphone, I guess. Anyway, absolutely, yes. GMT is more than happy to continue our engagement with that neighborhood and the rest of the residents in Elbert County that might be affected by our operations. It's always been our goal to ensure that they know who we are, how to reach us if they have a question. If they have a comment, positive or negative, we want to know about it. We cannot fix a problem unless we know the problem exists. So we 100% can commit to further outreach to that neighborhood and share our schedule as our development continues.
Great. So I did notice comments from staff. I think also maybe a concern about this lag between the drilling of the first well and then potentially of the next 9. And so will you be coming to the commission to ask for a variance from interim reclamation because there's going to be that time frame with in between the 2?
I'll address that question as well, Commissioner McGowan. That is likely, although not certain at this point in time. You know, we do need to see some results from this development, but it's likely that we will need more than 6 months from the conclusion of our completions operations to return to drill additional wells. So we'll likely be requesting a variance. And I do recognize that, you know, the rules as they are, you know, our position is that it does make sense to seek that variance rather than perform interim reclamation, move gravel and dirt and topsoil areas that have been reseeded from the initial construction, and then redisturb them at some point later. From our perspective, it makes more sense to seek the variance and leave the site in a stable condition as it is today, rather than perform interim reclamation, then reconstruct the pad and for additional drilling efforts.
Thank you. And I am interested in hopefully hearing from you all later on that you were able to get electrification. And again, like the more I learn, the more dangerous I get, right? When I'm reading applications. And it was a little surprising to me that your emissions in the first year, some of your emissions were more than during drilling completion. Sometimes what we see with operators is they drop dramatically because those are the most emitting activities. And so I am eager to learn and hope that you can get electrified and reduce your emissions even more. I think everybody deserves the best that you can provide when they live near oil and gas. And so I'm happy to hear that. And I'm happy to hear that one of your tonnage estimates was an error. So that's a good thing too. So thanks for your presentation and thank you for answering my questions today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner McGowan. Commissioner Messner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the application and your presentation today. I just had a few questions so that I make sure that I understand what you're proposing, because you know, I understand that this is not a single activity, but one that's being contemplated over multiple years. And so right now, what I'm hearing you say is that the initial development schedule is based on the initial exploratory well, and that once that activity completes, which is anticipated by, I believe, February of 2024, then there would be some sort of pause to determine whether or not to continue with the drilling of the additional 9 wells. And so that's what I believe that it's indicated, and it could be up to 4 years before we're going to see any kind of additional activity on the site. And so I assume that you're going to de-rig, you're going to take down the sound walls, you're going to be in a production mode for up to 4 years, and then re-rig up, re-put up the sound walls, and I guess reevaluate the potential mitigation steps necessary in order to be able to ensure that you're minimizing and mitigating impacts on the ground that may be there 4 years from now, that may or may not be there today. Is that what I'm understanding?
Commissioner Messner, thank you for the question. I would say that our evaluation of impacts and the mitigations that we have designed for this site, it's my belief at this time that those mitigations will be adequate for a single drilling a single well and for future rig occupations. Our agreement with the surface owner, we've had numerous discussions with them. They have no immediate plans for development of the property where the well location sits. Our agreement doesn't restrict any development, but we will be maintaining communications with them, and I don't expect any residential development to occur on that property. We also have an agreement in place with the surface owner to the south, that where the access road is located. And they are considering residential development in the future, but again, their timelines are fairly far out. Similar conversations with neighbors to the west and to the east. So there's no guarantee, certainly, but we don't expect any new residential building units to be constructed within the time horizon for our development. The mitigations that we've designed for this site, distance being one, but sound walls and other elements listed in our OGDP application, we will implement all of those for a second occupation as well.
Okay. And so understanding that that you've got the initial well and then the contemplated second rig up for the additional 9 wells, as you were evaluating emissions and doing your cumulative impacts analysis and looking at truck traffic, were the figures that you placed in the cumulative impacts report indicative of truck traffic for both oil takeaway and produced water takeaway for 10 wells for the lifetime of the operations? Or did you have in there that at some point there would be oil takeaway that would reduce truck traffic?
Commissioner Messer, that's a great question. I'll address that. Under the COGCC rules as they are, we're permitting for 10 wells, so our impacts evaluate the full development plan. We hope, and I dare say believe, that we can improve significantly on that with additional investment in infrastructure. But we shared the full development plan through our permitting efforts, where we sought to secure permits and rights to fully develop this pad. So the data we provided reflects that. If we're able to, if we see some of the indicators that I mentioned in my presentation regarding productivity of the formation in this area, and the economics still support further development, then we intend to continue exploring infrastructure options that would further reduce any impacts from this development. But it's a very difficult thing to predict or commit to at this stage in the game.
So just to make sure I understand, though, the truck traffic, the truck counts associated with the cumulative impacts report, the emissions associated with the cumulative impact report, and the other elements that are being contemplated in there, all are based on not having either oil or produced water takeaway. Is that correct? They're all planned on hauling it off.
That is my understanding. The rules such as they are, I think we're required to provide all of those estimates.
Good. Those are the questions that I have. So thank you for answering my questions.
Commissioner Ackerman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Blair, and others for your presentation today. I appreciate it. And the majority of my questions were similar to those of my fellow commissioners. I did have just one kind of last curiosity question remaining, and I understand that we are looking at another potential OGDP just north and adjacent to this one in the coming weeks. Just wanted to ask why those are 2 separate OGDPs, since they are adjacent to each other, and why you approached it that way.
Commissioner Ackerman, great question. Thank you. I guess I'll start by saying these projects have developed on somewhat independent timelines, although fairly similar. You are correct. The upcoming OGDP is called the Ragged Pad, and it is the hearing is scheduled for next week. They are submitted as individual applications, primarily because they were ready to submit at various times. One was submitted quite a bit earlier to the commission than the second, but they moved through the process on a different timeline, and we ended up with hearings just 1 week apart.
Thanks. I appreciate that, Mr. Blair. Appreciate your response. I just wanted to make a general comment to all who are listening that with adjacent OGDPs, if possible, I certainly prefer them to be submitted as one OGDP together. But that said, my understanding is that that meets the regulations that we have on the book. So thank you for your response.
Further questions? Ms. Wazelinski, did you want to provide any rebuttal comments relevant to questions that were asked?
I don't believe so. I think Mr. Blair answered those in full. We appreciate your time and happy to answer any other questions that come up.
Okay, any further questions for commissioners, from commissioners? Seeing no further questions, do we want to move into deliberations? Does anybody want to make a motion? Commissioner Ackerman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Absent any deliberations from my fellow commissioners, I would make a motion to approve docket number 220600163 as presented.
Have a motion?
I'll second that.
Have a motion and a second. Is there further deliberations on the motion?
I have something, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
I just want to point out that I do struggle with applications that don't, especially applications that are going to contemplate multiple wells on this pad and a multiple well OGDP in the vicinity, still relying on hauling of oil away from the operations. I understand the situation here is exploratory in nature for this first OGDP, but the amount of truck traffic associated with, up to 20 wells on a couple of different pads in this vicinity is no small thing. And I hope that in your communications with the community and as well as Elbert County, who is managing the haul routes, associated with this, that they understand the significant nature of the truck traffic that is going to be associated with these developments, and both the wear and tear on their roads as well as the potential impacts associated with the residents within this area. To me, hauling of oil is not best in class anymore, and I would really encourage serious thought to be given to developing the infrastructure necessary to both move oil away as well as produced water in these particular situations to minimize the truck traffic necessary with these. Now, having said that, I do believe that this application does meet the rules, but it meets the bare bones of the rules. And so I think we see operators in the state of Colorado really striving to go over and above the rules, particularly in situations where they are around populated areas. And so that's just a comment from me.
Further deliberative comments? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Wazelinski. Appreciate your presentation. Are you up for the next one as well, or is your partner, Ms. Jost?
I am up for the next
Okay.
one.
Why don't we take 5 and give you a chance to gather the relevant people as well as the PowerPoint,
Okay,
and let's return at 10:01.
thank you.
All right, we are back. I believe we're taking up docket 221-000-271. Ms. Wazelinski, you were recognized.
Thank you, Chair. We do have Mr. Todd Hodges from Fort Lupton, who will be providing comment.
Great. Mr. Hodges, welcome.
Hey, thank you. Todd Hodges with the City of Fort Lupton. I'm also here with Clay Hartley, the planner that worked on this project. So thank you. It's been a long time since I participated with this commission. We haven't had a lot of activity. So, thank you for letting us speak today. This has been an interesting process because we have a new land use code that was actually adopted. We took a lot of good time during COVID. It took us 2 years to actually clean up our new code. The oil and gas position was a special permit at that time, and it went straight to council. We've since then, in our new code, which actually was adopted and then came into play in July of 2022, requires that we do a special use permit. So we actually added to it. We actually put oil and gas more into the industrial so it was a more even player with other industrial commercial uses. It is allowed as a use, as a special use permit in all zone districts currently. This was the first to go through our first land use process. So, and it went very smoothly. The process, I'll just give you an overview of our special use permit process. We do have a requirement for a pre-application meeting. We have met with this group numerous times on other projects, including this site, on prior discussions before locating at this location. It's located within an industrial PUD, and they've got a surface use agreement with the existing owner. And the owner has actually worked with them on multiple sites in this area, and it is one of our continuing growing areas for along the rail for industrial. So placement and impact was key, and that's what we look at when we do these special use permits. The pre-app is the first step. We go through the land use, the location, and give them direction in our pre-application meeting, and that includes Public Works, the building department, fire district, as well as planning at the minimum. And then they do a submittal. With that, prior to that submittal, they hold a neighborhood meeting. That is a requirement of our new land use, so that neighbors are informed or have the opportunity to actually ask questions prior to taking the submittal and then starting the land use process. After submittal, we set it up. It goes out for referrals, just like any other land use project. We treat it just like any other land use, and get those that feedback. The referrals have 21 days. We then coordinate those, go back to the applicant, and work on dealing with any impacts that need to be addressed based on the review by referrals. And that includes a multitude of the utility providers, school district, you name it, we've got them on the list based on that application. After that, once we're satisfied that they've taken care or mitigated a lot of the things before we actually go to the public hearing, we establish the public hearing before the Planning Commission. That is a public hearing process, so there is notification in the on the property as well as surrounding property owner notices. It then goes to the council for final decision. So this actually went to Planning Commission January 26th and was approved, and then went to our council on February 7th, conditionally approved. Since then, the applicants have been working with us diligently. We have the items that we need addressed, other than one condition, that they obtained the state oil and gas permit. And that's one of the things that we have specifically in our conditions. All the others are ready, and then we can record their special use permit, because we do record those for the public record, and then move on forward. Kerr-McGee, the group on this has been very good to work with. We've got long standing with them. We're actually happy to see some additional oil and gas in the city limits. It's beneficial, and we've had good, both historically and recently had really good rapport, and they're a good group to work with. So I don't have anything else other than that. If you've got any questions, I'm more than happy to go into that.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Commissioner Messner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to thank you, Mr. Hodges, for being here today and sharing information about your new land use process for oil and gas. It sounds like a good and thorough process, and really appreciate you sharing that with us. I do think that a robust local government process and the review of all oil and gas applications certainly helps us here at the commission make good decisions on siting of oil and gas locations within your jurisdiction, and having a robust oil and gas land use planning process, I think really creates a strong voice for that local government in those siting decisions as well. And so I really want to applaud Fort Lupton for doing that, and for you sharing that with us today. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Further questions for Mr. Hodges? All right, seeing none, I believe we now will hear from Kerr-McGee.
Thank you, Chair. We again have a PowerPoint, so if you could just give us one moment, we'll get that up. Wonderful. Well, good morning again, Commissioners. Again, this is Kelsey Wazelinski with Jost Energy Law, And with Jamie Jost, we represent Kerr-McGee in the land OGDP before you today in docket 2210-00271. We would like to thank Todd Hodges for his comments and participation through the Fort Lupton USR process, and also COGCC staff and the director for their efforts on this OGDP. Next slide. I'll take just a few minutes to summarize the land OGDP and requested relief before I turn it over to the Kerr-McGee team. This OGDP requests that the commission establish an approximate 1,280 acre drilling and spacing unit to develop 10 new horizontal wells in the Sharon Springs, Niobrara, Fort Hays, Codell, and Carlisle formations. The land OGDP also requests that the commission approve one new Form 2A for the new land-fed 1029HZ pad for the development of 10 new horizontal wells. As indicated by Mr. Hodges, the land OGDP is located within the city of Fort Lupton, and the city approved the special use permit for the land-fed location in February of 2023. This OGDP does not trigger any Rule 304 ALA criteria, and specifically the proposed location is over 2,000 feet from a residential building unit and high occupancy building unit, over 2,000 feet from all schools and childcare centers, and not within any high priority habitat. As part of the land OGDP, Kerr-McGee has committed to plug and reclaim 16 wells within 1 year of all new wells turning onto production and decommissioning 8 facilities. Kerr-McGee will describe the associated emissions reductions in the presentation today, and Kerr-McGee will reclaim 7 more acres than it will disturb in this OGDP. And finally, Kerr-McGee has complied with all notice requirements for the land OGDP. No formal petitions were filed and no public comments were received. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Matthew Wells, a regulatory advisor with Kerr-McGee, to continue the presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Wazelinski. Good morning, Chairman and members of the Commission. My name is Matt Wells, and I am a regulatory advisor at Kerr-McGee Oil and Gas Onshore, a subsidiary of COGCC USA. Joining me today are several subject matter experts to answer any questions you may have. Here is our outline for this presentation. So let's get started. Next slide. You know, the Commission has gotten to know Kerr-McGee very well over the past few years and how we've safely drilled over 1,000 horizontal wells and have plugged over 2,500 older wells over the past 5 years. But did you know that we have over 400 employees that live in more than 80 communities along the Front Range and Plains? We are a proud member of these communities, and we are dedicated to being a partner of choice by enacting world-class best management practices that ensure the safety and well-being of our neighbors, our workforce, and our environment. Next slide. Kerr-McGee is a leader in DJ Basin with many innovative best management practices. And I think this graph on the right really underscores how those BMPs in our operations are setting Kerr-McGee apart from the rest of the operators in Colorado. Under the EPA rules, and with the most recent EPA flight data, Kerr-McGee still has the lowest emission intensity operations in Colorado. And we have already met the 2030 CDPHE Regulation 22 target. Next slide, please. Here's another visual of the surface location and drilling directions of our proposed land OGDP. The proposed wells and production facility are located over 2,000 feet from residential building units, high priority habitats, schools, childcare, and designated outside activity areas. Fort Lupton is the relevant local government, as you heard, and we have received approval for our special use permit application from their city council on February 7th, 2023. This proposed location is in the industrially zoned Northland Planned Unit Development, or PUD. And as such, Kerr-McGee commits to meeting the fencing, screening, and visual appeal standards of that PUD. Next slide, please. Here's an overview of the permitting timeline for this project from that first pre-application meeting with Fort Lupton and the COGCC staff in May of 2022 to this month, when Kerr-McGee received the director's recommendation. Noteworthy here is there were no comments and no petitions filed against this application. Next slide. Here you see our estimated phases of operation timeline for this project, from pad construction all the way through to interim reclamation in 2024. Next slide. This is a closer look at the proposed location. As you can see, there are 0 receptors within 2,000 feet. That yellow hatching layer you do see, that's just indicating that it is in Fort Lupton's municipal boundary. Next slide. This is a closer view of the wildlife map of the area. You can see this proposed location is not in a high priority habitat area. Kerr-McGee dispatched third-party environmental consultants to perform surveys of the area in July of 2021 and again in 2022. And no environmental concerns were noted. Next slide. Kerr-McGee is proud to be able to commit to plugging 16 older wells and decommission 8 associated facilities, effectively removing 8 water tanks and 9 oil tanks from the area. Removing these 8 facilities will eliminate over 1,200 truck trips annually to those sites. We also anticipate that we will be able to reclaim approximately 7 more acres than the proposed land OGDP will disturb. I also want to highlight the table of estimated emissions avoided from these wells that we plan on plugging. This information has been incorporated into our application and in coordination with the COGCC staff for this OGDP. Next slide. This slide highlights some of the best management practices that will be applied to this OGDP as a result of Kerr-McGee's existing infrastructure in DJ Basin. The water on demand system and our oil pipeline takeaway capability will combine to eliminate over 80,000 truck trips for this OGDP. And like the vast majority of our locations, this proposed location will be linked to Kerr-McGee's Integrated Operations Center, where it'll be provided real-time monitoring and operation capabilities 24/7, 365 days of the year. Also, to avoid odor issues, Kerr-McGee is committed to using Group 3 drilling mud and a closed loop system. Next slide. These are specific BMPs that will be implemented to minimize operational impacts to receptors as much as possible. This includes inspections, temporary emission control devices, drilling rigs with sound reduction features, and a quiet completions fleet. The grading and drainage plans were approved by Fort Lupton Planning Department and were submitted as a part of this application. Next slide, please. The aerial map here shows the haul route that has been designed to efficiently route traffic to paved arterial roads. This route has been approved by the city of Fort Lupton. I also like to note on this slide, produced water takeaway was vetted for this location. The nearest capable disposal facility is 5 miles to the northwest. Routing a pipeline to this facility would require boring under Highway 85 and the South Platte River and create about an additional 30+ acres of disturbance. Given the short duration of high water production and weighing the impacts of building this pipeline, we felt the plan to truck water was the greatest way in protection of public environmental health and welfare. Next slide, please. Next, I would like to provide an overview of our robust air monitoring program. The air monitoring plan for this OGDP has been approved by CDPHE on February 9th. Air monitoring summaries for this location will be posted to the OXY stakeholder website monthly. Next slide. Since 2020, we have monitored at 17 different production drilling sites, 24 different completion sites, and 14 different production facilities, giving us thousands of data points to evaluate any potential impacts from our operation. This map on the right here shows how Kerr-McGee will position air monitor sensors around the land-fed location. Next slide. Over the past 3 years, using the approved air monitoring program, Kerr-McGee has collected over 5,000 air samples and spanning all phases of oil and gas development. And all results, as shown on this graph on the left, are well below the CDPHE health guidance value of 9 parts per billion for benzene. Next slide. Kerr-McGee has worked diligently to place this proposed pad, 2,000 feet from any RBUs. The nearest RBU is approximately 2,240 feet to the southwest. And Kerr-McGee's air monitoring program will place 2 air sensors, one at 165 feet away and another 300 feet away from the working pad surface, in between that home and the working pad surface. And as such, and as all the robust data that we've collected demonstrates, we believe emissions at the nearest RVU will be less than historical data, but with recognition that there are still background concentrations. Next slide, please. Kerr-McGee's full-time stakeholder relations team prides itself on having great community engagement. Here is the specific outreach for the land OGDP. Like mentioned before, we did host a community meeting on September 20th. All required COGCC and municipal notices were sent out on time. The team has received 5 calls from people living outside of 2,000 feet, and all were questions from adjacent mineral owners. The stakeholder team provides the community multiple different ways to receive communication and information, from in-person meetings, phone calls, mail, email, text messages, and their website that gets updated frequently. Next slide, please. Before I turn it back over to Ms. Wazelenki, I'd like to summarize a few points. No petitions were filed against this OGDP. All Fort Lupton requirements have been met. Cumulative impacts will be minimized by plugging 16 older wells, removing 8 related facilities, and reclaiming approximately 7 more acres that will be disturbed. Kerr-McGee is proud to present this OGDP and is confident in our ability to develop this location in a manner that protects public health, safety, welfare of the environment, and wildlife resources. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Wells. Next slide. This last slide shows the relief requested for the land OGDP. Kerr-McGee respectfully requests your approval of the OGDP and associated drilling and spacing unit. We do have a team of subject matter experts here on the hearing, and this does conclude our presentation, and we are now open for questions.
Great, thank you very much. Before we open it up for questions, I wanted to ask staff if they had any additional information they wanted to present. This wasn't a loaded question. I know staff did want to present something. Hi, Laurel. You're muted.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Good morning, commissioners and members of the public. My name is Laurel Faber, and I am one of the lead OGLA's Oil and Gas Location Assessment Specialists on the Kerr-McGee Land OGDP. I would like to take a moment of your time to clarify, for the record, 3 minor corrections to the director's recommendation as requested by the applicant. First, in the surface land section under the oil and gas location disturbance area, the name says land dead 10-29HZ, and this should state land fed 10-29HZ. And second, the town of Fort Lupton should be the city of Fort Lupton throughout the entire director recommendation. And finally, under the pre-application consultation section, the name Kerr-McGee should be capitalized. That's all I have, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. We will consider the director's recommendation so amended. Thank you very much for those quick clarifications. With that, would open the panel up to questions from commissioners. Do commissioners have questions? Commissioner Ackerman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that. I don't have any questions, but I do have a comment. I just wanted to say that recently in other hearings, I've made statements of concern associated with current and historic practices of certain operators. And I've specifically stated that the state has done its part working diligently to be flexible with oil and gas development and to work with operators, and that I expect operators to do the same. And I think it's very important that we give credit where credit is due. Some of the highlights of the presentation today and of this application are that 16 wells will be plugged and significant attenuating equipment will be removed. It's taking place in an industrial PUD. It's distance from receptors. There's been significant stakeholder outreach. This company is already meeting 2030 emissions standards. There's a net gain of 7 acres. And a number of best management practices and best practices in general are being employed, such as Group 3 mud and robust air monitoring, freshwater delivery systems, oil and gas takeaway pipelines. The only weakness that I could see was a missing produced water takeaway and it being trucked. And I just wanted to say that these aren't standards that have come about randomly or have been historically run of the mill, but rather a lot of innovation and work and dedication and specific intent at this company and at the personnel level has been required in order to reach these standards. And I think it's very important that we recognize the efforts of industry to work to attain the goals that the state has set. And I commend this operator for the work that they've done. And I know that sounds a little gushing, but to me, it's very important that we make statements when we've constantly asked people to do good, to go above and beyond. To me, this is an application that does that. I appreciate the presentation and the significant efforts that have gone into it.
Yeah, no, Commissioner Ackerman, I agree completely. I'm looking at slide number 5, the industry leading BMPs, the integrated operations center, the water on demand, the oil pipeline takeaway facility, and in particular, the lowest emissions intensity of any operator within the basin. Those are really important components, and want to thank this operator for the good work and going above and beyond standards and doing the right thing for the state of Colorado. Other commissioners with comments or questions or emotion? Commissioner Messner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also concur with Commissioner Ackerman's thoughts. And so it's nice to see an operator actually go above and beyond and really set the standard for what's possible in oil and gas operations in the state. So thank you for the presentation and the quality of application and the thoughtfulness of the application. So thank you for that. And with that, I would move approval of the application.
Second.
Motion and a second. Is there further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you to the entire team that is before us and the panel that is with us. We appreciate the presentation and appreciate the good work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Next on our agenda, we are 4 minutes ahead of schedule, is the consideration or commissioner deliberations on the Mark Martinez and Joey Irwin Memorial Public Projects Fund request by the Colorado School of Mines. We heard this last week. We took a week to give folks a chance to consider it. Ms. Larson, do we have anybody present for this, or do we just dive right into deliberations?
We do have Mr. Schlagenhoff, and I believe we do have a few other representatives from the School of Mines available should commissioners have additional questions. But I think our expectation was that commissioners would just continue with their thoughts and proceed with making a determination on the request.
Great. Does any commissioner desire to provide thoughts on this matter at this point? Commissioner Messner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to thank the applicants for their application and the amount of information that was provided in there. I thought they did a great job of utilizing the amended Martinez Irwin Fund grant application that this commission developed and approved. I think the information that was necessary was provided. And so I do want to thank them for taking the time to be thorough with their application and thorough with their presentation as well. I'll note that the utilization of the Martinez Irwin Fund, as indicated in the grant application, is to further the COGCC's efforts in protecting public health, safety, welfare, the environment, and wildlife resources. I think this commission has determined that one of the important elements of that is that COGC, or a state agency, be a partner in that. And I think we heard from Mr. Schlagenhoff that from his opinion, as well as in his communication with different department heads within the COGCC, that this research, this proposal could very well be beneficial to the work that COGCC is doing in protecting public health, safety, welfare, the environment, and wildlife resources. I think this is a little bit unique in that the application really fits within the School of Mines criteria for how they propose funding research projects. I think this does include some elements that we haven't typically funded in previous Martinez-Irwin Fund, either public projects or some of the initial projects that we funded. I will also note that some of those other projects that we were funded, we partially funded. And so some of these things that were being considered in this particular application may have been funded from other mechanisms and not directly from the Martinez-Irwin Fund. I do think the promotion of it through, I know there were some questions about concerns on travel to conferences and being able to interact with folks and take feedback on the research and promote the research at different conferences. Maybe unique in this presentation and something we hadn't seen in other ones, but from my perspective, I think that's actually a valuable thing to be able to present this at conferences, to be able to receive feedback on it and perhaps build upon some of the research that's being done here so that it could potentially, if successful, be utilized in other venues around the country. And so I don't have a ton of heartburn about that. And so I think overall from this commissioner's standpoint, because in particular COGCC staff is in support of it and think that it would aid them in our mission, then I'm in support of the application.
Thank you, Commissioner Messner. Commissioner McGowan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I mostly agree with Commissioner Messner. I was a little disappointed not to see some matching effort from the applicant. I find the indirect to be a shocking amount because I know if we were ever to submit that as a state agency to the legislature, they would laugh at us. And so I was going to ask to remove the travel for the conference and ask the school to figure out how to fund that. I do think it's valuable. I will let it go. I will let it go. I do think it's a valuable application in that it's going to be something that we can share with other states for them to use and model if they would like to figure out how to determine risk factors for their own lines. So I think that's valuable in that we're going to fund something that potentially could benefit operators who have infrastructure and other states who are struggling with how do we figure out from a risk-based perspective when and how we should be replacing or inspecting or looking for corrosion. And so I will be supportive of the application.
Commissioner Ackerman.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I also am supportive of the application. I am mostly swayed by its very significant applicability to the intent of the Martinez-Irwin Fund, and had also some concerns. I would, prefer some skin in the game, for lack of a better word. I do think it's important in most cases for entities to have some skin in the game when they're seeking dollars. I do get the particular challenges of higher education institutions with regard to that aspect. And so, like Commissioner McGowan, I'm willing to be okay with that this go around, and just wanted to state that I appreciate Commissioner Messner's leadership on this program and this issue, and am supportive of this application.
Great. Me too. Do we have a motion?
I will move approval.
Second.
Motion and a second. Is there further deliberation? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Ms. Larson, if you could inform the applicant as well as staff of the approval of this use of the Mark Martinez and Joey Irwin Memorial Public Projects Fund, we would appreciate that.
Most certainly.
Anything further before the commission? Seeing none, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All right, we are adjourned. Good job, guys. See you soon.